Well, welcome to this lecture on the way of things. This lecture is going to be on game trails and how to read them and understand them and what they mean as far as the animals that use them. So we'll start out, of course, one of the things there is a certain amount of scale, if you will, on game trails. You could actually go down to the level of the ants, and they actually will make trails sometimes. And they're a way to actually look at the desert and see what the ants are doing, and it will tell you about the environment and how it's working. The next level up, of course, will be the rodents, and they too make trails. They're not as commonly found, but they are there, and they do tell you about what the particular rodents are doing and the level of activity. And a lot of times you'll be able to read things like this particular little trail the mice have been using quite a lot, but in the last week or two they haven't. And why is that? Do you think there's a weather component? Has it been just too dry? Has it been too cold? And you can start to read into the trail usage, what's happening in that particular little patch of ground that these rodents, whether it's a pack rat or field mouse or something, is using. However, most of the time when we talk about game trails, especially in wilderness country, we're talking about either the deer or the desert bighorn, but also cattle, burros, horses also make trails, and there's also information on them. Sometimes a lot, and sometimes these game trails are used, in fact almost all game trails are used by various animals. An animal that maybe a trail is mostly a deer trail, but I assure you when necessary a coyote will run along the same path because it's easier going, or perhaps he's actually hunting deer. Now, one of the ways we're going to try to learn to look at game trails, and one of the interesting things I found in the desert that will open up a lot of knowledge once you start to see it, and that's what I call the three-trail system. And it's a very classic trailing system in the desert. You don't always see it. It's not always there. It's one of the things you have to have this kind of this artistry rather than science to find these kind of things and see them. But it's an important concept to know, and once you know the three-trail system, you'll start looking at things a little different, even game trails that aren't part of this particular phenomena. So let's start. If we have, let's say, a wash is going along here, and we'll say the water direction is flowing this way, going that way, got a little arrow here, and we have a hillside here coming down. We got a spring right here, and it's a focus point spring. The standard trail system, and this is, just imagine this is at a 45, say, and this spring's on the side of the hill. You're going to have a trail system coming in from here, and you're going to have a trail system coming in from here, and then another trail straight up the middle from the bottom of the wash. Now, normally, this trail here is going to be primarily used by predators. And there's reasons for that, which we'll get to. And then these trails here are going to be used by your deer, your bighorn sheep, and other animals. And of course, it still will be used by your coyote, bobcat, mountain lion, and so on. Now, all things being, I guess you would say, average or ideal, I guess would be the way to put it. These two trails are going to be going downward toward the water. And the reason is that your bighorn sheep, your deer, cows and horses are head heavy. And they're head heavy to quite an extent. Anybody who's ever ridden horses knows that trying to ride a horse downhill, even a mild incline, can be rather rough because the horse is wanting to go over the top. And And if you look at the structure, the biomechanics of the deer, the horse, the bighorn sheep, their front legs are heavier, thicker, and stronger because they have to carry more weight. Not only the weight of the lungs and heart and stuff that seems to be further forward in the body, but also their neck and head. So they have a disadvantage going in. Well, when a sheep is going into the water, let's take a bighorn sheep, he's going to come to this spring. He's going to hang up here for an hour or two, maybe half a day or more, looking at that water, making sure it's okay, and then he's going to come in. Now, if he gets in there and gets his drink and he has a problem, he's going to want to run out of there, and he's always going to want to run, if he can, uphill, because he's better at running uphill. So if he's got a mountain lion or a bobcat or a group of coyotes on his tail, even if it's a single ram or a ewe, group of ewes with some young ones, they're going to want to run uphill. And so these trails are going to be their escape. They're fast, they're up, and that's what they want. So that's why these trails these side trails tend to come down to the spring. Whereas this trail is often in view of all this, and of course different things play. You can start to work the wind into this, the sunlight, and all these other things that will play into this whole game. And sometimes you might have a deal where there's no trail here. This trail doesn't exist because it's too rocky, and you might find where the sheep or the deer or something have taken a more radical trail up and down, more like this, and it's contorted a little bit, but it's still a three-trail system, and you can often then take a look and say, well, which trail do they like and why? Is it a wind advantage? Is it a terrain advantage? Is it an escape terrain? Maybe it's a view that they like, and you start to read back the other ways. The terrain is starting to tell you the very psychology of the animal, and not just of a particular animal, but indeed the herd through sometimes thousands of years. That psychology is held steady for just eons. Many times on some of these trails you'll actually find glyphs. The most common is the lower trail. The lower route to the water is most commonly will have glyphs on it, showing that it's been the strategic access for a long time. So once you start to understand this trailing system, you can start to read the psychology of the terrain, of the animals, of the herd in depth. Now, of course, all trails don't go to water. This is something that you got to kind of get out of your head, that every game trail is going to some place. It's kind of hard to believe that these animals would find a place out in the desert and walk the same place year after year after year, generation after generation after generation. But oftentimes they do. And a lot of it has to do with choke points in the terrain. If you have a rim rock that has a steep cliff lava flow that blocks miles and miles of desert from each other, you'll find game trails at the very end of them. And you'll even find trails that are really quite a ways away from these choke points, but the animals are starting to come together and getting ready to go around that obstacle. Another kind of trail that you'll find sometimes I call feeding trails. And you'll find a lot of feeding trails. You'll find a hillside, and sometimes burros really do this, and cows will really make a trailing system like this, and oftentimes obliterate the ancient trailing system. But you'll find if this whiteboard is a hillside, you'll find trails that just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, come in, and they're like this. All up and down, and you'll think, what in the world why would sheep or deer or even cows for that matter make such a trailing system? They don't seem to be going anywhere or doing anything in particular. Well, if you watch these animals for a while, what you'll find is they'll get on a trail like that, and all they got to do is turn their head only slightly, and they can sit there and eat the plants as they move along on a side of a hill. And it's very easy for them to just browse along this same shelf, and after thousands of years, these little shelves, these little trails, have worked in, and the sheep use them over and over and over again. Another place you'll find that both sheep, deer, cows, etc. Will use over and over again are bedding sites. And a lot of times the critical terrain that they're maneuvering through, and they're taking in view, scent, smell, north slope, south slope, plants, all this kind of stuff. And there's actually a way that's best to get from where they're feeding to where they plan to bed that night. And some of these bedding sites are literally thousands of years old, and they've been used for generation after generation. And so these game trails have been literally ground into the dirt, ground into the geology, and they're telling you that. They're actually telling you something that maybe that trail is only used once a year, twice a year. But it's been done like that for countless generations of sheep and deer. And then once it gets established, again, your coyotes, your bobcats and whatnot will tend to follow. And with that, you start to understand that the coyote and the bobcat have different issues as far as following trails. Because they're hunting, a trail isn't necessarily a strategic way to hunt. In fact, sometimes it's the wrong way to hunt. So when you see a coyote on a trail, whether it's a feeding trail or a game trail leading to water, it's often an animal that's on the move. He's often an animal on the move rather than on the hunt. And that's the kind of stuff that you start to pick up, that these trails are really telling you a lot of information. And of course, once you follow one of these trails, you can also get an assessment of the population. Is this trail being maintained, or is it weathering away? Is there animal tracks and droppings on it in recent times? Do you have fresh droppings, or does it look like there hasn't been an animal on there in 50 or 100 years? Again, you start to learn what the animals, the population, the psychology, because it's literally written into the ground. And so when you're out in the desert and you come across a game trail, spend a little time, speculate a little on its condition and where it might be going, and you might be surprised some of the things you learn. And with that, I thank you and hope you enjoyed this lecture, and we'll be seeing you. Thank you.